Why he picking on Boosie? Because I fight to get Marlo Mike out. He'll die in there. He went to go tell because he couldn't sleep at night. Boosie sleep good at night because he didn't pay the trip. Baby had 9 bodies. 15 years old. He paid $2,000 per hit. And people saying God on his side. You're a damn lie when he got a 15-year-old doing life in prison. And by the way, I helped work on that law to try to get this kid out. It's called JLY. I went to Washington, D.C. over 4 or 5 times. We got him abolished, but you know what? They didn't make it retroactive for the boy Boosie used. So that's why this is personal to me.
One of my other partners had got murdered. And Marlo Mike was on the scene. And the police was like, they couldn't take it no more because they didn't know if this young guy was that advanced to where like he was murdering shit while they was watching him, you know? So they went on and picked him up. But when they picked him up, they told him, my partner Tyree Gangsta Reeves, rest in peace, when he got killed, they picked Marlo up that same night. Just because that's where Marlo's family was located at. And that's the people he was calling and he was talking to. So just so happened, he came over there and my partner got killed. So they went on and picked him up.
When you had a 15-year-old hitman, nigga, that murdered black people. Who next, Boosie? That little nigga had that tattooed on his chest. He killed so many black people for Boosie. Boosie Boo. The little kid got life without parole at 16 years old, my nigga. Juvenile life. A law that I fight to have abolished. A law that I fight personally, nigga, and work on with children in Angola. And Lil Boosie had a paid, hired hitman little boy that killed nobody but black people. Lil Marlo Mike in the back itching for a body is what he said.
A 15-year-old kid, 9 bodies, and a secret that stayed buried for years. Let that sink in. Before he could legally drive, before he could vote, before he even finished high school, this teenager was allegedly tied to 9 killings in Baton Rouge. And the wildest part? He wasn't some cartel boss or hardened crime veteran. He was a kid, barely old enough to grow a beard, moving in a world built for grown men. But here's where it gets even darker. While this teenager ended up facing life behind bars, a rising rap star connected to the same circle stood trial and walked free. One life locked away forever. The other back on stage, dropping music, throwing pool parties, building a brand. How does that happen? How does a 15-year-old become the center of one of Louisiana's most explosive murder cases? Who was really pulling the strings? And why, after years of silence, is this story suddenly bubbling back up again? Because there's something most people missed. This isn't just about crime. It's not just about street loyalty. And it's definitely not just about one rapper and one teenager. It's about influence, power, manipulation, and a justice system that treats a child like a fully grown monster. And now, after all these years, the silence might be cracking. Because the same teenager who once kept his mouth shut, the same one who allegedly carried out hit after hit for just a few $1,000s, is reportedly ready to talk. If that happens, everything people thought they knew about this case could flip overnight. But to understand how we got here, how a teenager ended up with 9 bodies tied to his name, we have to go back to Baton Rouge in the mid-2000s, when fame, Oak Street politics, and raw ambition collided in a way nobody saw coming. And trust me, this story only gets darker from here. Mid-2000s Baton Rouge wasn't just another southern city trying to get by. It was tense, loud, divided. The streets were already complicated, but after Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, everything intensified. Thousands relocated to Louisiana's capital, and with that came rising pressure. More people, more turf disputes, more conflict. Violent crime rates in Baton Rouge during that period were among the highest in the country for cities its size. Homicides were climbing. Neighborhood rivalries weren't just arguments, they were wars simmering under the sun. And in the middle of that chaos, rap music was becoming the loudest voice in the room. That's where Boosie Badazz stepped in. Before the name change, when he was still known as Lil Boosie, he wasn't just another rapper chasing radio spins. He was the voice of the streets. Signed to Trill dropping records that reflected real Baton Rouge life, he built a reputation fast. Tracks like Zoom and Wipe Me Down weren't just club hits. They were anthems. Raw, direct, unfiltered. And when music starts reflecting street politics, it doesn't stay separate from it. Success brings attention. Attention brings jealousy. Jealousy brings enemies. As Boosie's name grew nationally, tension at home grew too. Allegedly, there were ongoing disputes, rivalries, and personal conflicts tied to the streets he never fully left behind. The rap spotlight didn't erase old problems, it amplified them. And here's the reality most people don't talk about. When someone rises from a high-conflict environment without completely stepping away from it, protection becomes more than security guards at a show. It becomes something deeper, more personal. That's the environment forming in Baton Rouge at the time, a mix of fame, money, street loyalty, and unresolved beef. A city already on edge, a rising rap star navigating both stages and street corners. And somewhere in that same city, a 15-year-old kid was watching. He wasn't famous, he wasn't powerful, he didn't have money, but he was about to be pulled into something far bigger than he understood, and once that connection was made, there was no turning back. He wasn't a headline yet, he wasn't feared, he wasn't even old enough to legally work most jobs. His name was Michael Louding, but in Baton Rouge, people knew him as Marlo Mike, 15 years old. Let that sit for a second. At 15, most teenagers are worried about school, friends, maybe a part-time hustle. Their brains are still developing. Science shows the part responsible for impulse control and long-term judgment, the prefrontal cortex, doesn't fully mature until around age 25. That means decisions at 15 aren't processed the same way they are at 25 or 35. But in certain environments, childhood doesn't last long. Growing up in Baton Rouge during that era meant exposure to things most adults struggle to process. Street politics weren't abstract. They were visible, tangible, real. And when you grow up surrounded by power figures who command respect, especially successful rappers who seem untouchable, admiration can turn into loyalty fast. Influence is powerful at that age. When someone with fame, money, and status gives a teenager attention, it feels like validation, like purpose, like belonging. And in high-risk neighborhoods, belonging can mean survival. Prosecutors later described Marlo Mike as someone who became deeply connected to individuals in that circle. According to court records, he was accused of carrying out multiple shootings between 2009 and 2010. Investigators claimed he was paid around $2,000 per killing. $2,000. To an adult, that number might not seem life-changing. To a 15-year-old in a struggling neighborhood, it can look huge. Sneakers, clothes, helping family with bills. Respect from peers, the kind of money that feels like power when you've never had it. But here's the part that changes everything. Allegedly, Marlo Mike was connected to 9 killings before he turned 16. 9. He wasn't driving yet, he wasn't voting, he wasn't signing contracts. But investigators say he was navigating situations that most grown men can't survive. And the more those allegations stacked up, the more questions began to surface. Was this a teenager acting alone? Was he trying to prove himself? Or was he influenced by older figures with far more experience and far more to lose? Because in high-stakes environments, the youngest person in the room often carries the heaviest risk. And soon, the pressure would become too much to hold in. The number didn't just shock Baton Rouge, it stunned the entire country. 9 killings. According to prosecutors, that's how many separate shootings were tied to Marlo Mike before he was even old enough to drive legally. Investigators allege the incidents happened over a short period, mainly between 2009 and 2010. The pattern, they claimed, wasn't random. These were targeted hits. And the reported payment? Around $2,000 per job. Think about that math. 9 lives taken. Roughly $18,000 total. That's not generational wealth. That's not security. That's not freedom. That's barely enough to hire a strong defense attorney once things fall apart. Court testimony later described how each killing allegedly followed a similar structure. Identify the target, track movements, wait for the opportunity, execute, disappear. It sounded almost clinical, organized, strategic. But behind those accusations was still a teenager. That contrast is what makes this story so disturbing. Because when people imagine someone tied to multiple murders, they picture a hardened adult. Not a 15-year-old who, by law, can't even rent a hotel room. Not someone who still technically belongs in a classroom. Prosecutors argued these weren't impulsive acts. They described them as calculated, coordinated, connected to disputes and rivalries already brewing in the city. One of the most high-profile cases involved a man named Terry Boyd, who was killed in October 2009. Authorities alleged that this shooting was one of several tied to the same chain of events, and that's when the spotlight intensified. Suddenly, Baton Rouge wasn't just dealing with street rumors. There were arrests, there were indictments, there were headlines. The narrative forming in court painted a picture of a teenager operating as an enforcer inside a larger conflict. But here's the part people still debate. Was he acting independently? Was he trying to earn status? Or was he influenced by powerful adults who understood exactly how to stay insulated? Because if the allegations were true, someone older had far more to gain and far more protection, and then something happened that nobody expected. Before investigators could fully build their case, the teenager walked into a police station. And what he said next would change everything. It didn't start with a dramatic arrest. It didn't start with police kicking in doors. It started with a teenager walking in. According to reports, Marlo Mike voluntarily spoke with investigators and gave a confession tying himself to multiple killings. That decision stunned both the streets and law enforcement. In environments where silence is survival, talking is almost unheard of. So why would a 15-year-old do it? There are different theories. Some believe the pressure became unbearable. Others think fear caught up with him. Some argue guilt played a role. And some believe he thought cooperation might reduce his punishment. Whatever the reason, once he spoke, the case shifted overnight. Investigators now had statements, details, a narrative they could build around. And once that door opened, prosecutors began connecting names, timelines, phone records, and alleged payments. In street culture, confession equals betrayal. The word snitch spreads fast. Loyalty is everything. But this wasn't a grown man with decades of street code behind him. This was a teenager facing the reality of what he had done, or what he was accused of doing. And here's something most people overlook. Teenagers process fear differently. Their brains are wired for emotion first, logic second. When consequences suddenly become real, prison time, life sentences, permanent separation from family, panic can override everything else. Once the confession became public knowledge, the city split in two. Some people said he broke the code, others said he was a kid drowning in something bigger than himself. Because once you admit involvement in multiple killings, there's no walking that back. There's no reset button. The system moves fast after that. Charges expanded, indictments followed, and soon the focus shifted beyond just the teenager. Investigators weren't only looking at the shooter anymore, but they were asking a bigger question: who benefited? Because if a 15-year-old allegedly carried out multiple targeted killings, someone older might have had a reason, and that's when one of Louisiana's biggest rap stars found himself standing in a courtroom, fighting for his freedom, while the teenager who confessed was staring at a very different future. When the indictments dropped, the energy in Baton Rouge shifted overnight. This wasn't just another street case anymore. This involved a nationally known rapper. Cameras showed up, news vans lined the courthouse, blogs ran headlines daily. What started as local violence had turned into a courtroom spectacle. Boosie Badazz was charged in connection with multiple murders, including the 2009 killing of Terry Boyd. Prosecutors alleged he orchestrated hits while maintaining his music career. They painted a picture of someone living a double life. One in the studio, one in the streets. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If convicted, he was facing the possibility of the death penalty. The prosecution leaned heavily on testimony and statements, including the confession given by Marlo Mike. They argued there was a pattern, motive, coordination. They tried to show that the alleged shooter wasn't acting alone, but the defense came prepared. They challenged the credibility of witnesses. They attacked inconsistencies. They argued there was no physical evidence directly tying the rapper to ordering any killings, no recorded instructions, no money trail proven beyond doubt. And in criminal court, doubt is everything. Reasonable doubt is the wall prosecutors must climb. If jurors aren't convinced beyond that threshold, they must acquit. After weeks of testimony and intense media coverage, the verdict came down in 2012. Not guilty. Boosie walked free. Supporters celebrated outside the courthouse. Critics questioned the outcome. Baton Rouge buzzed with arguments that lasted for years. Some saw it as justice served. Others believed it showed how money and strong legal teams can shift outcomes. Meanwhile, the teenager at the center of the storm was facing a very different reality. While one man returned to music, interviews, and stages, the other was heading toward a life sentence. And that contrast, one free, one locked away, is what still fuels debates today. Because after the acquittal, attention moved to the next chapter. the sentencing of a 16-year-old who had already confessed. He had just turned 16 when the sentence came down. Life without parole. Well, no release date, no second chance hearing, no possibility of walking out at 40 or 50 after showing growth. Just a cell. Until death. Michael Louding was sent to Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola, one of the largest maximum security prisons in America. A place built on an old plantation, a place known for housing some of the most serious offenders in the state. And he arrived there as a teenager. At the time, Louisiana was one of the toughest states in the country when it came to sentencing juveniles. Across the United States, more than 2,000 people were serving life without parole for crimes committed as minors. The idea was simple. Some crimes are so severe that age doesn't matter. But science was beginning to challenge that thinking. My neurologists had already established that the human brain, especially the part responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, and risk evaluation, isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. That means a 15-year-old doesn't process consequences the same way a 30-year-old does. The court, however, focused on the severity of the crimes. 9 killings tied to one teenager. The judge ruled that the level of violence justified the harshest possible punishment. The message was clear: some actions permanently close the door to freedom. And that decision ignited debate far beyond Baton Rouge. Was justice served? Or was a child discarded by a system that doesn't believe in rehabilitation? Because once those prison gates closed behind him, the world kept moving. Music continued, careers advanced, social media arguments faded in and out. But inside Angola, time froze. And then, just months later, something happened at the national level that changed the entire conversation about juvenile life sentences. A Supreme Court ruling that would shake the foundation of cases like his. The question was, would it come soon enough? Just months after that life sentence was handed down, the ground shifted. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. Alabama that mandatory life without parole for juveniles violated the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The court said judges must consider a child's age, background, and capacity for change before imposing the harshest penalty. That ruling didn't say juveniles could never receive life without parole. It said it couldn't be automatic. For thousands of inmates sentenced as minors, this was a lifeline. Suddenly, the national conversation wasn't just about punishment, it was about development, growth, and whether a teenager should be defined forever by actions taken before their brain fully matured. Then, in 2016, another decision, Montgomery versus Louisiana, made Miller retroactive. That meant people already serving mandatory life sentences as juveniles could seek new hearings. Hope spread across the country. Resentencing hearings began. Some inmates saw reductions. Some became eligible for parole. Advocates called it a turning point in juvenile justice reform. But here's where it gets complicated. Not every case qualified the same way. Courts had to decide whether sentences were truly mandatory under the old system, or if judges had already considered discretion. Legal technicalities started shaping outcomes. For Michael Louding, the path wasn't simple. Louisiana courts reviewed multiple juvenile life cases after Montgomery. Some inmates received parole eligibility after serving 25 years. Others remained locked in legal battles over interpretations. So, while headlines suggested a sweeping victory for juvenile justice reform, reality was slower, messier, dependent on local rulings. That's when outside voices started getting louder. Activists, commentators, critics of the system. And one of the loudest voices in this particular case came from Charleston White. He didn't just question the sentence, he questioned the entire dynamic that led to it. And once he stepped in publicly, the story stopped being just about court rulings. It became personal. When Charleston White entered the conversation, the volume went all the way up. He didn't whisper about injustice, he blasted it across social media. Charleston has built much of his public identity around juvenile justice reform. He openly talks about how young offenders are often manipulated, used, and then discarded. So when he speaks on the case of Michael Louding, it isn't subtle. He argues that a 15-year-old serving life while powerful adults move freely represents a broken system. In his view, this isn't just about one teenager, it's about influence. He questions how a minor allegedly tied to 9 killings ends up with no path to release, while older figures connected to the same environment continue building careers. He calls it exploitation. He calls it hypocrisy. And he doesn't hold back when mentioning Boosie Badazz. That's where things get even more divided. Because in street culture, there's a code. Silence equals loyalty. Speaking to authorities is betrayal. Period. No context, no exceptions. So when rumors surface that Marlo Mike may be willing to cooperate further in hopes of a second chance, opinions explode. Some say he already confessed once. What else is there to say? Others argue survival changes everything when you're facing decades behind bars. Is it snitching? Or is it a desperate attempt to see daylight again? That question splits communities right down the middle. One side sees loyalty as sacred, no matter the cost. The other sees a teenager who grew up behind prison walls and wants a shot at redemption. And as those debates rage online, one reality remains unchanged. He's still inside. Step back from the names for a second. This story isn't just about one rapper. It isn't just about one teenager. It reflects a pattern that shows up again and again in high-conflict environments. Older figures with status, younger boys searching for identity, power flowing in one direction. When a teenager grows up watching someone from his neighborhood become famous, respected, even feared, that image carries weight. Influence at that level doesn't need written instructions. It works through proximity, through admiration, through the desire to belong. Psychologists call it authority influence. When someone you admire signals approval, even indirectly, your judgment shifts. And for teenagers, whose brains are still developing, that pull is even stronger. Studies show adolescents are more likely to take risks when they feel accepted by high-status peers or mentors. Now add street culture to that mix. Respect becomes currency. Loyalty becomes law. That violence can become reputation. And in some corners of hip-hop history, authenticity is tied to how real someone's background is. The industry markets that edge, the audience consumes it, but the consequences rarely hit executives or streaming platforms. They hit neighborhoods. That's where the accountability question starts. Legal responsibility and moral responsibility aren't always the same thing. Courts focus on evidence. Public opinion focuses on influence. One asks, can this be proven beyond doubt? The other asks, who shaped this outcome? When a minor allegedly carries out extreme acts, people ask whether he acted alone in spirit, even if he pulled the trigger physically. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Teenagers don't create violent ecosystems by themselves. They grow inside them. So here we are, a teenager condemned to life, a rap star acquitted, a city still divided. Should minors ever die in prison? Does influence reduce responsibility? Can someone who committed horrific acts at 15 truly change? The courts decided once. Now the culture has to decide what justice really means.